My name is Matt McGarity. I'm a communication faculty member here at the University of Washington, and I'm the director for the Center for Speech and Debate, which is hosting today's debate. And as part of its mission, the center is dedicated to fostering a society where effective communication and the civil exchange of ideas are valued and celebrated, where important initiatives like 2124 can be debated in a rewarding format. And so we're in for a great debate today. The issue of long-term health care and Washington Cares is a challenging one. Both advocates and opponents acknowledge the importance of long-term health care planning. Medicare is an important federal program, but it doesn't cover many of the costs associated with long-term health care. And it was in this spirit that the Washington State Legislature passed the Washington Cares Bill in 2019. So, what does WA-CARES do? Employers must deduct a 0.58% from employee wages, so that's 58 cents on every $100 earned, and participation is mandatory for most employees, whether they're full-time, part-time, or temporary. And that brings us to the topic for today, Initiative 2124. I-2124 will make mandatory participation in WA-CARES optional. Advocates say it gives workers choice to stay or participate, stay or leave or opt out of 2124. Opponents will say 2124 will take away the only affordable and guaranteed long-term health care plan. And it is a complex issue, so it demands a debate between two experts. So we've got two experts. Arguing in support of the initiative, we have State Senator Mark Mullet. Senator Mullet is a Democrat from Washington's 5th Legislative District. He was elected to the Washington State Senate in 2012. He's currently the vice chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, where he also serves as a leader of the Senate's capital budget team. He has raised questions about Washington Cares since its inception, recently arguing in favor of 2124. He was actually the lead author of the support statement for 2124 in the Washington Voters Pamphlet. So thank you, Senator, for joining us. And arguing against the initiative, we have Ms. Libby Watson. Ms. Watson started her career in politics in Northeast Ohio before coming to Seattle. And once here, she spent a few years in the nonprofit sector, focused on youth engagement, and then she returned to electoral work as a campaign manager. And as a communications and organizing consultant, Ms. Watson has advised a variety of clients, including the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, the Washington Cares Program, Invest in Washington Now, and several labor unions. In 2022, she was the field director for the Washington State Democrats. She's currently the campaign manager for No on 2124. So Ms. Watson, thank you very much for joining us. And since the ballot presents a yes or no option, so does our debate question today, which is, should Washington voters support Initiative 2124? Let me explain the debate format. Each side will begin by making their case for 7 minutes. Next, we have 2 rounds of back and forth, with each side getting 2 4-minute rebuttal periods. And then finally, each side has a 5-minute closing to finalize their case for us. So once again, that's opening, rebuttal, closing. And so with that stated and clarified, we'll go ahead and begin with Senator Mark Mullet, who is arguing that yes, Washington voters should support Initiative 2124.
Yeah, great. I'm going to start a timer on my phone. That way I'll try to keep myself on track. But I just, for my own personal background, I actually did speech debate at Foster High School in Tukwila. When I went there, I graduated from Foster back in 1990. And so when I got an invite to do a speech debate class, I was like, hey, this sounds kind of cool. And I was happy to be here. And my life outside of the Senate is I own a Zeke's Pizza restaurant and 4 Ben & Jerry's ice cream stores. And so I have a lot of interaction with people of similar age groups to you guys. So I think part of my kind of views on this legislation was influenced from the fact that I work in the restaurant industry with a lot of people who are kind of in their late teens and 20s. So going back, I guess, I think you kind of heard what it is. This bill was passed the Senate back in 2019. It was House Bill 1087. It did a payroll tax for all employees in the state of Washington at 0.58%. And that was the premise of the bill, is that payroll tax would then generate money which would fund this long-term care program. During my 12 years in the Senate, this is actually the biggest tax that we passed. I know 0.58% doesn't sound like a big giant number. It's actually generated $1.3 billion. That's $1 billion of taxes in its very first year. By the end of this year, it will have $2 billion in that account since it launched on July 1st of 2023. So this is actually a very, very large burden, I think, on Washington residents in terms of, having to pay to get this program up and running and continue its support. I would kind of like, I think I'm going first, but I think I've heard a lot of the arguments, I guess, that obviously there's been a lot of TV commercials and stuff. And so I kind of want to just address those arguments as we go here now. And the first argument I've heard is people can't afford this. And that is kind of the premise in the TV commercials. I'm going to give kind of the counter view from my staff at both Seeks and Ben & Jerry's is they have a hard time affording this because it is money out of everybody's paycheck. It doesn't matter. Like, I think our goal as Democrats is we try to create taxation that we think is more progressive. So people who are on the lower income ladders aren't hit by those taxes. That's why when you go to buy food at the grocery store, there's not sales tax on food because we try to make our system more progressive and less regressive. This tax, everybody has to pay. It doesn't matter how poor you are, you have to pay this tax. And I think for my staff members, the mathematical reality of everyone in this room, if you work in the state of Washington right now, you have W-2 income, you're paying this tax, the math is really straightforward. Over the majority of you will never get any benefit from this program because you will not retire in the state of Washington. Even for people like me who are 52 years old, your odds of actually retiring in the state of Washington are a coin flip. And you look at people who are here for college, you're substantially lower than that because you have a lot of iterations in your life of where you're going to end up. And so right away, I think the affordability to me is the lens of, can people afford to pay a tax that the majority of people will never receive a penny of benefit from the tax? And my argument is they can. I think my staff at Seeks and Ben & Jerry's felt they couldn't afford that tax. I think the second argument we've heard is that it's bad for women. I think my counter argument to that is, first off, I have 4 daughters, so I'm really careful about supporting any legislation I think that is bad for women. And I think that my experience is when people have kids, a lot of times they end up being a lot of the part-time workers in the workforce. You are not eligible for this program if you work less than 500 hours a year. The majority of people who end up working less than 500 hours a year are women because they're balancing raising their kids at the same time of being in the workforce for financial reasons. So they're working, they're paying the tax, and they haven't even reached the vesting point after the first year. So I think there's an argument that the tax itself is unfair to female workers in the state of Washington. I think another argument we've heard is this is no different than Medicare or Social Security. Those are 2 programs as a Democrat that I love. This is why Social Security and Medicare are substantially different than walk-ers. Everybody, doesn't matter where you retire in the United States, everybody benefits from Medicare and Social Security. Those are fully portable programs. You can start out like during my life, I was born and raised here. I went to school at University of Redlands in Los Angeles. I went to school at Indiana University back in Indiana. I worked in New York, for 5 years. And so I've worked and lived throughout this country. Everything I paid into Medicare and Social Security, no matter where I was, has stayed with me the entire time. Like, this program is different because it basically benefits if you retire in the state of Washington, which the majority of our workers won't end up doing. I think so to me, to say it's like that, I think is the whole actuarial premise of why this program works is because it pencils out because the majority of the people that pay into it will not receive benefits. The tax rate would be substantially higher. Medicare and Social Security are designed to everyone pays in, everybody gets benefits, which to me is a much fairer way to do it. I think in terms of the portability, when the bill originally passed in 2019, it was crystal clear. You retired, you got older, you want better weather, you go to Phoenix for retirement, you don't get a penny out of this program. There was a bill that was passed that amended that to put quote-unquote portability in the legislation. I think it's portability in quotes because it is extremely difficult to actually get any benefits from this program and maintain your eligibility if you move out of state. That is by design. The old Milliman, the actuary who has provided all the data for the state on this program, their actuarial analysis had a very little impact when we added the portability bill this session because their own analysis is very few people are actually going to take advantage of the portability option because the hurdle is so high to maintain it if you end up going out of state. And the way to qualify becomes 10 times harder also if you go out of state. I think the final one is pre-existing conditions. This one really speaks volumes to me because people say you're going to really make it difficult for people with pre-existing conditions to access a benefit. My counter argument, this, unlike the other initiatives, this is optional. You can opt to stay in the program. So people with pre-existing conditions can opt to stay in the program. This budget account will have $2 billion. $2 billion on December 31st of this year. You could do a lot of things with just the interest alone from that $2 billion for people with pre-existing conditions in the state of Washington. And so we're not, this initiative, if you vote for it, does not get rid of the program. It just says people, like if you know you're going to retire here, yeah, you should opt in and stay here. If you know you're not going to retire here, I would advise you to opt out. And if you have pre-existing conditions, you can't access another plan, 100% you should opt in and stay in. So I think this argument that people with pre-existing conditions, if the initiative were to pass, aren't going to have a way to get taken care of, that would be the fault of the legislature because they have $2 billion to work with and they could make that happen. And I think just in closing, the final piece is look at the ads. $8 million. $8 million has been spent by SEIU to convince you to vote against this. They are the single largest political donor to Democrats in the state of Washington. They supported my 12th Senate campaign. They supported my 16th Senate campaign. I know how important they are financially to Democrats running for office. If Amazon, when they put up $1 million against stuff in Seattle in 2019, it was the front page of the paper. Amazon's trying to buy something. They just put $1 million in. SEIU has put in $8 million into this to basically, they got the bill to pass in 2019 and now they're trying to convince every voter to vote against it because it is a huge benefit for their organization. I don't think it benefits the entire state of Washington. It definitely benefits SEIU, and that's what I'm trying to educate people to vote in what is in your best interest, which is to give optionality for this benefit. Thanks.
Well, hi. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. My name is Libby Watson. I'm the campaign manager for the No on 2124 campaign. And I oppose this deceptive and intentionally misleading initiative because it will take away long-term care benefits from millions of Washingtonians and force us back to the so-called choices that have led us to the long-term care crisis that we're facing as a country. The choices that we have without Washington's long-term care program are to be so wealthy that you can afford to pay out of pocket, to go through the expensive and broken private insurance industry, or to drain down your savings to qualify for Medicaid. To quickly address the so-called option of paying out of pocket, most people have less than $5,000 in savings. It is no coincidence that the person who got this on the ballot, speaking of millions of dollars, was Brian Haywood, who put $6 million of his own money as an individual to get these on the ballot. So of course, he's in a place of privilege to be able to pay out of pocket. During the 2022 legislative session, I was a comms consultant for the We Care for WellCares Coalition, and one of my tasks was to go through the hundreds of complaints filed with the state office of the insurance commissioner regarding private long-term care policies. What I found was a devastating track record of delayed and denied claims and jacking up premiums by up to 300% without notice. The private insurance industry also charges women more than men, up to 70% more, and it doesn't cover anyone with a pre-existing condition, which is about half of the people over age 50. Just the other day, I was speaking at a community event in Tacoma, and an attendee came up to me afterwards and asked if she could tell me a horror story. She told me that her late husband and she had paid for a private coverage for years. They put thousands of dollars into it. He was diagnosed with cancer. She didn't hear back from the private company for 90 days. Unfortunately, he didn't make it that long. She never got clarity on why that was, and they never saw a dime from that private coverage that they put thousands into. My friend Kim was born with a rare congenital disease that she hasn't been treated for since she was a child. She's now almost 60 and went to apply for a private long-term care insurance, and they denied her because they considered that a pre-existing condition, which she didn't realize because she's an incredibly healthy and active adult. The private long-term care insurance industry is not an affordable option for most, which is part of the reason why only 3% of people in the country have it currently. And it's not an option at all for the many who have a pre-existing condition. Unlike the state's long-term care program, the other downfall to the private industry is that you have to continue to pay into it after you've retired, when many people are on a fixed income and can't afford rising premiums. The other option that is far less than ideal, that many of us had when we need long-term care, is to drain down our assets and savings to qualify for Medicaid. If this initiative passes, it will increase the tidal wave of Washingtonians relying on taxpayer-funded Medicaid. To proactively address what supporters say, that if we as the initiative opposition think the program is so great, why do we think so many people will opt out? They will opt out because of a well-known phenomenon called adverse selection. Like any other social insurance program, like Social Security or Medicare, it relies on an extremely broad base of contributors in order for everybody to be eligible for a benefit. The Washington Office of State Actuary has proved that all scenarios under 2124 lead to insolvency and elimination of the program by 2027. Just yesterday, we had a press briefing with experts, including a professor at UMass Boston who not only helped implement the Affordable Care Act, but has led research studies related to issues affecting financing and delivery of long-term services, a professor emeritus in the Department of Healthcare Policy at Harvard Medical School, a senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Institute in the Program on Retirement Policy, and the founding director at the Boston College Center for Retirement Research. All of these experts agreed with the Washington Office of Financial Management, with independent tax experts, and with representatives of the private industry themselves that 2124 will collapse the program. To quote one of these experts, there is no question, there is no way it can survive an opt-in arrangement. Even initiative backers, like Elizabeth New at the Washington Policy Center, who's often featured as a spokesperson for the Vote Yes campaign, admits that the initiative will eliminate it. She said so last week at Let's Go Washington's Lunch with the Experts webinar. She even wrote this in an opinion piece for the Seattle Times, saying, yes to I-2124 is the most promising way to get rid of walk cares, hopefully entirely. This initiative was written to mislead voters. They don't want us to know that the initiative only helps the uber wealthy and big private insurance companies that routinely jack up premiums and deny coverage. Rather than give us more choices, this initiative takes away the only affordable care option available to millions of Washingtonians. This initiative and long-term care affect all of us. It's not just because 70% of us need long-term care at some point, but if you're fortunate enough to not need it yourself, the odds are almost certain that you will become a caregiver or have to help a loved one, your parents, get through the process of needing long-term care. There are currently 800,000 unpaid caregivers in Washington, mostly women, who often have to leave their jobs or cut back on hours to take care of loved ones, which isn't good for the economy or those families. I-2124 would take our ability to pay family caregivers away. I'm proud to say that our campaign has a wide variety of over 150 endorsing organizations, including those who don't often get involved in electoral politics, like AARP, the National MS Society, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, ALS Association, and care service providers. Those in addition to the Washington State Nurses Association, Planned Parenthood, and hundreds of individual healthcare providers. They're opposing the initiative because they are closest to the long-term care crisis we're experiencing as a nation and know its impact on caregivers and patients. So they know how important it is to continue improving and strengthening and expanding on Washington's long-term care program. We are also endorsed by groups like Moms Rising and League of Women Voters because they know this initiative disproportionately hurts women. 2124 is also opposed by organizations who advocate for working Washingtonians and a more just economic system because this initiative will increase costs for families, low and middle income families. So to answer the big question of this debate, no, voters should not support 2124.
Start my timer again.
Yeah.
I think the long-term care, we want to compare, like my daughter just turned 16 this month, she has a 2012 Toyota Prius. We don't want to compare a Toyota Prius to like a Ferrari. So when people say long-term care is expensive, the private policies, you have two policies you can buy. The one is kind of, you're going to get $8,000 a month from the second you enter a long-term care facility until you pass away. Yes, those policies are extremely expensive because like my mom has Alzheimer's, she's in an ageist facility in Bellevue at the age of 77. We don't know how long she's going to be in there for. She could be in there for 2 years, she could be in there for 10 years. So the insurance has to price the risk of they could be out $8,000 a month indefinitely until that person passes away. The policy that we're talking about here in Walk Care is the fixed benefit policy. So I get 60,000 in W-2 income as a state senator. I get another 40,000 from, my restaurant W-2 income. So I have 100,000 a year of W-2 income. So I was going to pay $580 a year through WA Cares if I stayed in the program. I knew what was coming in summer of 21, so I actually opted out of the program and bought my own policy to prove that I had my own policy and I didn't have to sign up for this one. That policy cost me $21 a month. And it was $50,000 of benefits, which has already grown to $58,000, and it was fully portable. You can't compare these fixed policies. They are extremely affordable, these fixed policies. Yes, the policy that pays $8,000 a month indefinitely from the second you enter a facility until you pass away, those are extremely expensive. But the type of policies that WA Cares provides, I was able to purchase as a Washington resident in the summer of 21 quite easily. And I think it's interesting we talk about the group supporting this. My wife's a teacher in Issaquah. Like the Issaquah Teachers Union offered every single teacher in the Issaquah School District the option to have a private policy because they realized it was going to be substantially cheaper for the teachers to buy a private policy than go through WA Cares. So some of the groups who say they support this, at the same time are actually offering their own members the ability in 21 to do something on their own on the private side and not participate in this state program. But the only people who knew about it in the summer of 21 were people who follow what happens in the legislature or people who had more sophisticated, HR departments, so they work for a larger corporation. So that's like my wife as a teacher in Issaquah, obviously people who work for Microsoft or Amazon, they were given that option. I firmly believe the fact that people move here now, even if they have a long-term care policy they've been paying on for years and years, are required to pay into this program as well, seems unfair. And so the final piece, going back to pre-existing conditions, this is really important. This program will have $2 billion. That is a giant sum of money. Like I say, this is the single largest tax the legislature has passed during my 12 years in the Senate. It generates $1.3 billion a year. Even if half the people decide to opt out of the program, it's still going to generate hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on top of the money that's already there that you can then work with without having any liability to provide benefits for people because they chose to opt out. Once you opt out of the program, you're walking away from that money. There is a million ways the legislature can address people with pre-existing conditions if they're thoughtful in this upcoming session or the initiative to pass. And as Democrats, we really highlight, I have 4 daughters. I think Donald Trump is crazy. I'm really upset about what's happened to women's reproductive rights in our country, and we say over and over and over, let people make their own decisions about their health care. Let people make their own decisions about their health care. Some people prefer to have a private plan that's fully portable. Some people prefer to put money into a retirement vehicle so they can use it on life events that happen in their 20s or 30s, not just for long-term care in their 70s. This initiative gives people the option to do what works best for them in their personal life of how they manage their healthcare decisions. If you want to stay in, stay in. If you want to get out and do something different, get out and do something different. That's why I encourage people to support the initiative this November 5th. Thanks.
So to first address private insurance, I don't want to talk about it ad nauseum, but I, in my opening statement, talked about how broken that industry is. Again, can't stress enough, it delays and denies claims. The number of complaints filed at the Office of Insurance Commissioner are countless. And they're devastating personal stories. Long-term care is a really emotional thing. And a lot of us don't expect it. We don't plan for it, which is one of the main reasons that we're facing this crisis as a country. So like other social safety net programs that people don't necessarily plan for, that's what this is doing. And there are over a dozen other states watching how this initiative goes because they've been looking into creating similar programs. People across the nation know that there is a very real need for programs like this. And I want to address some of the issues with the policy. So it is not a perfect program. All of us who oppose the initiative are pretty much on the same page there. It is not the perfect program, and there were 2 big flaws when it originally passed that we heard a lot of complaints about that a lot of people still haven't heard been addressed. They are that new retirees can now use the benefit. So at first, if you were going to retire within 10 years, which is the full vesting period, you wouldn't be able to use it. That is no longer the case. You can tap into the benefit if you're close to retirement. The other thing is portability. You can move out of state now. I get that a lot of Washington College students, you might not live here for 10 years and then move elsewhere, but if you're retiring elsewhere, if you move elsewhere after paying into the program, you can use the benefit in other states. And what's important to talk about and acknowledge is that lawmakers can and intend to continue improving and strengthening this program. Pending bills include developing a supplemental insurance market for those who want more coverage, modifying the minimum 5 years of consecutive work, and extending exemptions to military spouses. I can't stress enough the amount of studies and financial analysts who have looked into this initiative and unequivocally say, if it passes, the program will not exist. We can't keep improving on something that doesn't exist. So voting no on this initiative is our best chance to create more improvements so that people have an affordable long-term care option. And then the other thing I wanted to address is benefits not being enough. So it's tens of thousands of dollars now. The lifetime benefit grows with inflation, and even as it is now, if someone says that $36,500 doesn't sound like a lot of money, that is coming from a place that I don't exist in. That sounds like a lot of money to me and a lot of people, because again, the majority of people have less than $5,000 in savings. That amount of money, the benefit, will go a long way in helping families buy time and keep them out of debt. Unlike other forms of long-term care coverage, which are our other options, the state's program allows people to pay for things like wheelchair ramps or grab bars in the shower, and it's these sorts of modifications that allow people to age in place, which is most people's preference, and avoid trips to the emergency room, which are also expensive to the public and damaging to our healthcare system. I think that is all I want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think, let's go to the regressive nature of Washington's, tax system. So the sales tax is obviously regressive. In 2021, we moved heaven and earth in Olympia to pass the working families tax credit, where you can actually get, for low-income people, they get a rebate for $300 back, which basically offsets the sales taxes they pay that we know makes it hard for them to live here. When this bill went live in July of 2023, it's basically costing the average person over $300. So we completely offset, we keep talking about the importance down the road, but my experience from my staff at Zeke's and Ben & Jerry's is the people who have the hardest time affording to live in the state of Washington right now are like my kids. It's the younger generation that is struggling to be able to afford to live here right now. And so to move heaven and earth to say, hey, they're eligible for a $300 working families tax credit, and then turn around and then charge them $300 a year to be in this program, and all we just heard about was we're going to make it easier for people who are close to retirement who haven't been paying in for their whole lives. They may have just paid in very little. They're going to be now getting supported because the younger generation in their 20s is now having a tax they can't afford to pay to support for these people to have their retirement option. And I think it's important to look at this portability issue. This bill passed in 2019. We could have fixed portability the year it passed. We could have fixed portability in 2020, in 21, in 22, or 23. We did not. We did this quote-unquote portability fix only in the 24 session, only after the initiative qualified for the ballot. It was the only reason portability was addressed. And the reason it's so different, like my plan that I bought, it takes $22 a month out of my bank account every single month. If I were to go live in a different state, it would just continue to take $22. Under the legislation now that we passed for portability, if you were to go to another state, you would have to literally document what your earnings were for that year. Every single year you have to go through and document what were your earnings. You then have to reimburse the state of Washington a number that's going to vary every single year through cash, check, ACH, whatever. It's going to be a really complicated process. And unlike, as we heard from Libby, you're right, in the state of Washington you can do wheelchair ramps and things like that. If you go out of state, you have to be eligible, you have to meet the federal Medicaid requirements, which is a 10 times higher bar to clear. So you basically have to be someone who has a hard time, you need to have assistance going to the bathroom if you're going to be eligible for this program. It's not people who just need to put in a wheelchair ramp anymore. So that's why I say it's portability that's there to confuse voters thinking they could actually benefit from this program when the majority of Washington residents will retire someone else for better weather. I'm sure the people who are at school here who came from a different part of the country can acknowledge our weather can be a little challenging. And at the end of the day, the other initiatives are all about repeal. Repeal, repeal. This is the only one that's saying we just want people to have an option of what they want to do. We've had several sessions in Olympia where we could have fixed all these things. This is the first, we actually delayed the start of this bill in January of 22 because Democrats were upset about this bill going live. It wasn't just a Republican thing. We were hearing from members of my constituencies that I represent in East King County, Democrats saying, this proposal does not seem fully baked, you should delay it to fix it. We delayed it till July of 23, but nothing actually got fixed. Had we actually fixed the program like we said we would, the initiative would not be in front of us today. So the initiative gives you optionality. It's more important for young people than anybody else because you need to be able to find a way to afford to live here, and having this extra $300 or $400 a year taken out of your paycheck for a benefit you're not going to most likely see, statistically speaking, seems very unfair to me. And I really hope people are thoughtful when this election comes out. I know SEIU has spent $8 million on TV commercials to kind of buy this initiative no vote. People have to be thoughtful. There is one special interest. I'm not receiving a penny to be here speaking to you today. I'm just speaking as a Washington resident, a member of the Senate. And there's one special interest group in this, and they are really encouraging people to defeat the initiative for their own personal reasons, not for your personal benefit. Thanks.
I'm going to start by saying, if it's not obvious, I'm a younger person. I'm 29, and I strongly, professionally and personally, oppose this initiative. Struggling to get by in Washington is not a secret to me. I don't work in tech. I don't know if any of you have worked on a campaign before and know much about the industry. This is what I've done for years. I don't make a lot of money. It is still very much worth it to me to pay this modest payroll tax for an incredibly significant return on investment. And on a personal level, I also want to live in a society where we care about each other and are taking care of the people who do need long-term care. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm in the 30% of people who won't need long-term care at any point, which also I'm going to talk about this in my closing statement, but right now, 40% of the people needing long-term care are under the age of 65. Needing long-term care can happen at any point, even if you're only 22 years old. It could happen to me now. I could leave here and tragically get in a car accident and need long-term care. These are the truths and the realities that we don't want to face. It's a sad issue, but it's reality. So to me, it is very much worth it to be able to pay into a program where we're taking care of our elders and our community members. I also want to address the taxation and the idea that this initiative is looking out for young people and looking out for, what taxes we're paying in Washington. The people who got this on the ballot are the same exact group of people, and they're running a slate campaign, who are trying to repeal the capital gains tax. It's Initiative 2109. Repealing the capital gains tax will take millions of dollars away in funding, childcare funding for education, from the mega wealthy. I don't want to get too much into that initiative because it's not 2124, but this is the same slate campaign that they're running. SEIU 775, yes, is a strong supporter of the Vote No campaign, and they do have the ability to put money into it, unlike the over 150 endorsing organizations who are also opposing this initiative. We aren't backed by one special interest group the way that the 4 initiatives on our ballot were put there by one mega millionaire who moved to Washington to avoid taxes and barely lives here. He lives in Japan a lot of the time. So that's just a false campaign gimmick to say that it's looking out for us. The other way it impacts young people is that, like I mentioned earlier, more people without this program will have to rely on Medicaid. The tidal wave of people relying on Medicaid will fall on younger generations, Gen Z and Millennial, who will have to pay a higher tax because of that. And then I want to talk about younger people who do often, or who end up needing long-term care. We never know when something's going to happen. Marcos is a friend of the campaign. He was working as a nurse at Seymour Community Health when he had a stroke that, of course, he didn't plan for. He was only 47. And again, 40% of people who need long-term care are under the age of 65. Marcos wanted to be at home. This was before the program existed. Instead, he was stuck at a rehab facility because he couldn't afford to pay an at-home caregiver or get home modifications installed. And the state's long-term care program will help people in that position, not just the elderly. Danny Rice, another friend of the campaign, she never expected that she would need home care. She went in for a routine medical procedure at the age of 30 and left in a wheelchair. Without the state's long-term care program that she's currently paying into and hoping to receive benefits from, her husband is planning on having to quit his job or cut back on hours significantly to stay home and take care of her if 2124 passes. Thanks.
All right, so now we move into closing, 5-minute closing.
I'm going to thank, I've been in the Senate for 12 years, so 2017, we had a bill that I think was a national leading bill on, paid family leave for Washington workers. This was done in a bipartisan manner, where we sat down with Republicans and Democrats, we sat down with the business community, we sat down with the labor community. We basically passed a bill that when I talked to my own staff as some beneficiaries, and they're like, oh, I can get money for take 12 weeks off if I end up having a kid, or I can take 12 weeks off to support, a loved one who's going through a health crisis. This was done in a thoughtful way, and I'm really proud. I was a champion of that legislation. I sung from the rooftops when we were able to get it passed about how I thought we were really helping Washington residents. To me, the key to that legislation was even my own staff in their 20s, I've seen them use it. They've had kids or they've had loved ones who've gotten sick and they've had to take time off to take care of them. And this paid family leave policy we passed in 2017 had broad support across the political spectrum. The reason why SEIU was put in over $8 million, the other groups are supporting it. SEIU is over 90% of the money that's paying for all the TV commercials. I'm guessing they're probably paying for Libby to be here right now, her salary on the No campaign. They have a vested interest from the very beginning because it benefits their membership more than it benefits the average Washington resident. And to me, we can't get distracted. Yes, Brian Haywood, the guy who put all the initiatives on the ballot, yeah, he wrote a big giant check to pay a bunch of people to gather signatures to put an initiative on the ballot. But you will notice you haven't seen any commercials supporting the initiative whatsoever because they don't have any special interest groups paying for ad time to basically encourage you to vote yes. All the special interest is trying to talk people into not giving themselves the option of whether they want to stay in or get out of the program. And to me, that's really important. This is the one initiative, isn't it to repeal the law? This is an initiative that says, hey, we want to make it optional. The legislatures, after they passed it in 2019, they had 5 sessions to improve upon it and make some sort of flexibility to acknowledge that this isn't a great fit for everybody. They did not take advantage of those 5 sessions. So now we're finally saying, let's just give voters the direct option of whether they want to have a choice of how they manage their own healthcare decisions later in life. And I'll say I'm proud of, I've worked on retirement security my entire 12 years in the Senate. We passed a bill this year called Washington Saves. The way Washington Saves works is it mandates that every employer has to give every employee the option to have money taken directly out of their paycheck and put into the retirement vehicle, like an IRA, for example. To me, that is something that is broad-based and has broad bipartisan support because it's your money, you put it in an account. If you have an emergency where your car breaks down when you're 28, you can access the money for that. If it grows and you end up having a healthcare emergency, no matter what age, you can access the money for that. To me, helping people prepare for retirement by putting money in a retirement vehicle, the state just passed a bill to help make that happen. To me, that's how you address the solution, the challenge we have of making sure people in Washington State are prepared for retirement. That bill is 100% portable. It has no hurdles whatsoever if you go retire in a different part of the country to access your dollars. It never touches the state. It's your money. There are real challenges to make sure people are ready when they retire to take care of their healthcare needs. This is not the only way to address those challenges. I think there's other ways that make a lot of sense. This initiative does not get rid of the program. It creates optionality. And I think from an actuarial standpoint, I will agree with Libby that the tax rate for the people, if the only people who benefit from the program are the ones who actually, pay in and they stay in, and you're getting rid of the fact that half the people are going to pay in and never receive a penny, yeah, for the people who stay in, it's going to be a higher tax rate. But to me, that's actually fair, because now the people who want to be in and have a high probability of meeting the benefits are paying slightly more in taxes, but they're going to get the benefits. To me, what's unfair is to have half of Washington workers paying the tax knowing full well they're never going to get the benefits. And that's what the status quo is right now. That's why it's really important, I think, when the initiative happens, people exercise the option to give themselves a choice of how they manage their healthcare decisions. Thank you very much.
I'm going to start with that last point about if there's an opt-in. So it'll create what's called a death spiral, meaning a lot of people will opt out, which will raise premiums so that anyone can get the benefit coverage, and then more people will opt out. The people who will stay in, that Senator Mullet just said it's fair if they pay more, are people who can't afford to pay out of pocket, or people who have pre-existing conditions. 70% of people need long-term care. And again, it's not just that 70% that this impacts, it is all of us. So to say that it's fair for those kinds of people to pay a higher tax rate feels pretty dark, to be honest. And then to comment on Let's Go Washington, which is the slate of Vote Yes campaigns, them not running any pro-2124 ads. That's simply not true. They've had an ad running for a while, since October 8th. Those ads have received 590,000 impressions. The anti-law cares and pro-2124 ad called Supposed to Help has reached a higher frequency, and it is targeting mostly men and women between the age of 35 and 75 with an income between 75,000 and 200,000 in Seattle. There's a YouTube link for it. You might have already seen it. They are definitively running ads in support of this campaign and also have, millions of dollars going into it. So given that we're out of college, a lot of you are younger, I want to talk again about 2124's impact on younger generations. So again, long-term care is not just for older people. Things happen that we don't plan for and don't expect. I told you the story about Danny. There's another campaign supporter who's been a spokesperson on behalf of the Walk Cares program for many years in the legislature, Anthony, who was diagnosed with lupus at the age of 20. He's still working, but even if he could afford private long-term care insurance, it wouldn't cover him because of that pre-existing condition. 2124's impact on young people goes beyond that. Often the burden of caring for aging adults falls on children. That's us. I don't know what I will do if my parents need long-term care, which is likely. I couldn't afford my own life if I'm forced to leave work to do that. Many of you, I'm sure, would be afraid of having to leave school to take care of your parents. This program that 2124 threatens to take away helps us in that way too. It would help our parents. And if your parents don't live in Washington, I again hope that the sympathy and empathy that I believe is in you could see how that would help people who do live here and who have parents here. And again, that burden of Medicaid and increasing tax burden would fall on us younger people. Instead of continuing to strengthen and improve on Washington's long-term care program, 2124 would destroy it. In the last 2 years, lawmakers have strengthened the program by covering retirees and part-time workers and making our benefits portable so we can tap into them even if we move out of state. Women are harmed by this initiative because, sure, we might work part-time, but by far the majority of women are unpaid caregivers that could be paid by the state's long-term care program, and 2124 would take that away. It will throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, by erasing over a decade of progress on providing needed long-term care support for Washingtonians and send us backwards, worsening the care crisis that we are already facing. Whether we need care for ourselves or a loved one, Washington's benefits will help pay for home modifications, medical equipment, transportation assistance, meal delivery for someone we love experiencing a serious injury, illness, disease, or aging. Too many are cycling in and out of hospitalization as a result of preventable falls, dehydration, and missing medication because they can't get the support they need at home. 2124 is opposed by every major organization that advocates for patients, caregivers, consumers, retirees, and working families in Washington, including the Washington State Nurses Association, AARP, League of Women Voters, Mom Rising, the MS Society, Planned Parenthood, and 150 other organizations in addition to SEIU 775, which represents caregivers all across the state. That together represents over 4 million Washingtonians. So the people that signed on to get this on the ballot, that is nothing compared to the very broad support that this campaign has built of the people who are closest to the long-term care crisis and don't want to see this initiative pass. To me, the question is clear. Do we want Washington to be a place where only the wealthy can afford long-term care? I don't. I hope you see the same thing. Voting no on 2124 will protect long-term care benefits for everyone. Thank you.
And I'm sure her advertising numbers are right. Mine was anecdotal. I just haven't seen the ad. So I'm sure whatever Libby said is actual factual.
Well, let me just now say, that was a great debate. This is what we look for in a good public debate. And I want to have you join me in thanking Senator Mullet and Ms. Watson. Thank you very much.
Stay till noon, but if you have to go.
No, I'm good, yeah.
Well, then,
So we have time, and they're willing to take some questions. If you've got questions on 2124, now would be the time.
someone's got to break the ice.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there are hurdles towards the portability of it when you move out of state. What would those hurdles be?
It's having to document your earnings. It's not like, let's say you moved out of state and you're on average, paid $340 that year you left. You can't just continue to pay that. You have to actually document your W-2 income, then submit that back to the state of Washington, and then remit that amount of money. It's a lot of documentation. And then the eligibility is completely different out of state versus in state. You have to be more infirm to get out of state benefits than if you're in state. And that's why the actuarial analysis is very clear. Like, it didn't have a big impact on the solvency of the fund. If you had something that was truly portable, that was really easy to keep with you, I think it would have a different impact on the fund. But I think the thought is most people who live out of state will end up not going through all those hurdles to try to keep their benefits, because this is not that easy.
And kind of to follow up with that, if you did move to another state and if they had something similar, would you be required to also opt into their taxes as well?
No other states passed it yet,
Okay.
but I don't know, Libby, I mean, you would have to, I think depending on what that state's legislation spelled out, like our legislation did allow, before the tax started in the summer of 21, you could say, I have private insurance and I proved it to you, so opt me out of this program because I've already taken care of kind of my retirement plans for long-term care.
And I'll add, it's true, we are the first in the nation to do this. A lot of other states would like to, but that means there's no roadmap for this, which is why it's really important that lawmakers can continue to strengthen and improve on it. And it's not yet active, which means it's still in the rulemaking process, and all the bits and bobs of the logistics of things like that are still being figured out and hammered out in the legislature and through the Long-Term Trust and Services Commission, some long acronym. So ideally, other states do implement it, and we could work with them to figure out the best way to keep improving on the portability.
Like right now, they would end up, if their law was identical to ours, you would end up having to pay in both. But I mean, but yeah, I think I agree with Libby. It's unclear what other states would do in this space.
Yeah.
Ms. Watson, you mentioned that you thought the program would collapse completely. And Senator Mullet, you said that there's already $2 billion in the account, and just the interest alone on that should be enough to sustain it. So,
For pre-existing condition people, I think the interest alone can provide a lot of benefits for people with pre-existing.
So I'm curious why, Ms. Watson, you think that the money that's already in the account won't be enough to sustain it in the future, even if the death spiral leads to a bunch of people opting out. Isn't there already enough money?
Yeah, you can call me Libby, but thank you for the formality. So it is not me thinking that, it is based on all the financial analysis that the state of Washington has done, that the private insurance industry has done, that independent finance experts have done, knowing that this opt-in arrangement will bankrupt the program by 2027. So the amount of money that there is now will go into figuring out how we dismantle the program. It does mean that people who have already started paying into it, if this initiative passes, they won't get their money back. There is no way for the state to refund people. So that money is just with the state, and people aren't getting refunds. But it is not us hypothesizing that the program will go bankrupt. It will be obsolete by 2027 based on the many different scenarios they looked at of this potential opt-in.
And I think my argument's been that you could have a laser focus on people with pre-existing conditions, because I know a lot of people with pre-existing conditions who actually make a lot of money. So assuming everyone who has pre-existing conditions are poor is a false argument, because a lot of them are doing extremely well. And so I think you could have a program that if I was, so let's say the initiative were to pass, so you're gonna be sitting on this pile of money. And I think you could say, what portion of that do I wanna use? Because part of it you're gonna use to provide benefits for people who stay in the program. A lot of people will stay in. But I agree with Libby, there's gonna be some adverse selection challenges. I would be intentional about that adverse selection and actually create a program that only people with pre-existing conditions are eligible to get into, and you could kind of funnel a lot of those billions that are there already into standing up something that would be completely different than what we have currently. That is just laser focused on people who are getting denied access through no fault of their own.
And to me, the issue there is that we didn't create this long-term care program just because of pre-existing conditions. We created it because the private insurance industry is broken and really expensive, and Medicaid and selling your assets down to qualify is far from ideal for kind of everyone. You don't want to bankrupt yourself just to be able to get the care you need.
Yes. Yes.
So, Senator, I know you talked about how instead of the $580 cut you would be paying annually, if you were opted into the program, you end up paying less for your privatized insurance. But I know that Libby had stated that you heard some horror stories about like private insurance giving people problems with like lack of response time or like not coming to help the situations fast enough. Do you have any concerns that if everybody was opted into the same program, there would be an influx of necessity and you might face those same complications and delays from this program as well?
Is that for you?
Yeah, I can tell who
Yeah, I think, yeah, for you.
For me or me? Sorry.
For Libby.
Libby, that's what I thought. Okay. I thought it started out as a question for you, and then I think it pivoted to a Libby question.
Honestly, that is a fair question and a fair way to think. I think the difference is that it would be run by the government as opposed to private for-profit companies. And we don't run into those same kinds of issues with payments with programs like Social Security or Medicare. So it's a fair question. We're not at that point yet because the program doesn't really kick in until 2026. But I would say no, simply because it is not run like a private insurance company.
And I think, like, I try to highlight, like the plan I bought, the $22 a month one, was affordable because it was capped at $50,000 index to inflation. I think now I get $58,000 or something. That is very different than if I bought the plan that like my mom would have needed, which is kind of this unlimited, like we're gonna pay up to $8,000 a month for you to be in a nursing home type of plan. So I think that's one of the real challenges of this debate. I agree with Libby, long-term care for that thing is really expensive. That's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about sort of supplementing. I agree with Libby, $36,500. I grew up in Tukwila, that's a lot of money. Like, I'm not disputing that's a lot of money. I'm just saying you can't compare the cost of people buying that plan to what I would have had to pay to buy the unlimited plan, because they're completely different vehicles. And I just want to make sure voters are understanding that demarcation between what I bought was lined up with the walk cares, that's why it was cheap and affordable. I couldn't have bought a cheap and affordable plan that is the $8,000 a month for as long as you're in a nursing home plan.
Okay, we'll do, sorry.
Sorry, super quickly. The issue with the private insurance industry isn't just the cost, it is also the issues that you just named of delaying and denying claims and jacking up premiums.
So last question. Yeah, go ahead.
And I might be misunderstanding this, Senator, but a couple times you mentioned that times had come up in legislation to improve Washington Cares, but it didn't happen. Why do you think that was?
If I'm being really honest, I don't think SEIU was looking to make fundamental changes to this program. until the initiative qualified, and I think there was sort of kind of a little bit of a panic. And so, it's highly unusual to delay the start of a program. I mean, this bill passed in 2019, it was supposed to start in January of 22. We didn't start until July of 23. That, in my time in the Senate, that just doesn't really normally happen. That delay was because we were hearing from voters, Democrats and Republicans, there was anxiety about the current program. And I was really disappointed that even though we bought ourselves both the 22 and the 23 session to do pretty substantial fixes around a lot of these issues, we chose not to. Then the initiative got the signatures, and then in 24, that's when the portability change happened, which I didn't think was a real portability change, but I think it was driven for reasons to make it easier to defeat the initiative than it was for other reasons. So I think there are some self-serving motives of why the portability thing finally ended up moving forward in a form that I don't think was ideal, but it did move forward. It's better than what we had before, I will give them that.
All right, well, again, thank you both very much. We've got some debriefing to do. Let's go ahead, we can take a picture with you and the class.